Hello and welcome to part 6 of the ArcSight ESM console run-through and training session. In this particular session we're going to be talking about rules, how we would go around and actually create a rule, what's the methodology and some of the background to that. I do strongly suggest having watched the other parts just to make sure that you know what I'm talking about and how we're doing things. I've also made for this particular session a little bit bigger screen so we can see a little bit more of what's going on with regards to the actual details, with regard to some of the details of what we can see and the rules that we're setting up as well. Let's have a look at what we got. Now, in this example, I'm actually going to take a very simple brute force login rule. I use this as an example simply because it shows a threshold. It shows a combination of aggregation, why aggregation is important, and how we use that to put data into a correlated event, and how we would go around doing the threshold. This is a common one that's relatively easy to explain and easy to understand, but it can be a little bit complex when you don't quite understand how things are working. So what I tend to recommend when doing these things is taking a look at the events that you're interested in. So in that scenario, I would always start with defining a filter, because with a filter we can use the filter to actually show the events that we're interested in specifically. So I go to the filter section. In this particular case, I just want to create a very simple new filter. I'm going to call this my demo rule filter, and in this filter I just can see the various aspects of the fields I'm interested in. Now I'm only interested in events where I've got category information, so I'm only interested in these failed login events specifically. So what I can do is I can just scroll down. I can go to my category information here, so I can look at this data. Now, again, remember how the console works. Remember how I want to jump around. I don't know what exactly these categories events are. I do, but for an illustration's point of view, you know, how would I know what these are? Now, I can do this one of two ways. First off, I can actually just put equals and then drop this down. And it actually shows me what the various information is, because it's pulled that from the active channel that we've got open in the first place. So I can see this is an authentication verify. Let me just make this a little bit bigger so we can actually see the data there. We want to have the outcome equals, and in this case drop it down, failure. So I just want to look for login failures. That's all, nothing more. So I can just define that in the filter. I've defined the name. Remember, I've defined the name there. There's my filter. I'm just looking for those. Of course, I could find those by adding the columns into the active channel here, or I can actually look at the particular event I'm interested in, which is actually one of these, and I could just open it, and it opens a tab up here where I could see the event information here as well, and I could just jump between the two tabs. So I'm not having to go backwards and forwards through a web interface. I'm not having to run anything separate. I just have a little tab or a little drop down here, and I can just access that data very simply and very easily. That makes it much more straightforward for me to get and understand the event information I want here. So let's just create that filter. Now I've created a filter, what I could do is I could just create a very simple active channel. New active channel. So an active channel there, here's failed login events for rule. So I want to specify it as now. I want to do the timestamp as end. Remember I talked about end time, manager receipt time, and so on. And a filter, I want to make it my filter. Click OK. Field set, let's just keep it standard. Create that. As doing that process actually creates my active channel for me, and there's all my active channels. Isn't that simple and easy? In fact, I've done that through how many clicks? Probably about 9 or 10 clicks there, and I've created a filter and I've created a dashboard, created an active channel view of the event information I'm interested in. Okay, well that's useful. I'm going to go back to my original active channel here just so you can see the other events as well. So now I've done my active channel so I can see the data. What I want to do is actually want to create a rule. So I go back to my rules. And in this case, I'm just going to right mouse click, new rule. Now, you've got 3 different types here. Just to be precise here, I'm actually going to create a standard rule here, but I need you to explain the other aspects here. A lightweight rule allows you to update an active list, like a session list or an active list specifically, and typically it's for populating data into those events. Rather than doing a full evaluation of a standard rule, you can just do a lightweight rule. It's simpler, it's faster, and it's much lighter on the operating system and the system itself to do that, if you're just doing adding or removing to an active list. A pre-persistence rule allows you to only set event information. So it allows you to change the data in a field, to update it, to put a calculated field or something like that. It only allows you to do a set. So if you notice the difference there, a standard rule allows me to generate a normal correlation rule allows me to trigger an alert, a notification, run a script, do pretty much anything at that point. A lightweight rule only allows me to act to an active list or a session list, or update an active list or a session list. And a pre-persistence rule only allows me to set event field information. Okay, just to explain the difference there. But what I want is a standard rule. So in this case, I'm going to do, if I could type my failed login rule. So my conditions, what am I looking for? Now, I could put my conditions in here. Again, notice the consistency here. I've got the same editor. It's the same common conditions editor. So I could just scroll down to my category information and just do the drop downs there. Or, because I've already done the filter, I could just do filter, my demo filter, done. And it's in there. So I'm looking for only those authentication, verify, outcome failure messages. And I've just put that in that. So it makes it important to make sure I give the filter something logical so I can understand what it is, but the data's there. Now, does that make a lot of sense from there? Well, of course, you could just do that and just click the summary. There's a nice little hint there because it gives you a matching filter. And of course, it gives me a link there. Notice my mouse then changes. It actually then populates the data into the description box here, and it tells me what the filter is. But if I wanted to, I could click that and it would take me to the filter itself and open it so I could see that too. So just a little hint there. I can go to the summary and see that. Next, we get to the aggregation tab. Now, what do I want here? Now, this is a failed login thing. So I want to actually have 3 failed logins in 2 minutes, a time frame of 2 minutes. But I've got 2 sections here. What do these mean? First one is aggregate only if these fields are unique. Now, in this example, I'm doing failed login. I want them to be the same. So I'm looking for the same set of information. So again, it really helps having these events with me here. So, okay, I used a very simple active channel where I just created the filter. Of course, it makes a lot more sense to create and do the investigation on the events of interest here so I can see and understand what I'm looking for specifically. So I want to make these are the same or identical sets of information, but I'm looking for failed logons. So in this case, I want to aggregate this information. So I want 3 events in 2 minutes when they have the same set of information. Again, it makes more sense when you actually see I'm doing this. So of course now I actually have a little drop down box. I'm looking for the same target username and target address. In fact, it's actually there as well. So I can see target address, attacker address, target username. So let me just put that in for a second. So target address, target username, and attacker address. What does that mean? Well, what that means is I'm looking for any events where I have a failed login, and that it has to have the same target username with the same attacker address from the same target address as well. So all those are going to be the same. So I'm just looking for 3 in 2 minutes. That's what the aggregation is. Why is that important? Well, it's important to do the selection, but it's also important, and I'll show you this in a second, with regards to the data that goes into the event itself, with regards to the correlated event itself. Actions. Now, this is the bit that often confuses everyone. So by default, first event is always active. So it's just right mouse click and deactivate that. Let me just explain what these are as well. I'm not going to go into too much detail around everything here. So I do strongly recommend reading either the ArcSight 101 documentation that's available on Protect 724, or looking through the ArcSight Console Administrator's Guide as well, because it will detail these out specifically. However, I'm going to go through these you can see they're broken down into groups. You've got events and thresholds specifically. So on first event is literally exactly what it means. If I see a matching event that matches the conditions, then on the first event, do these set of actions. I can then do on subsequent events. So that means not on the first event, but anything after that. Or I can do it on every event. So think of those group three together. It's just everything, or the first only, or anything subsequent excluding the first. And the same goes for the thresholds. So in this case, only trigger on the first threshold, only trigger on any subsequent thresholds, or trigger on every threshold. Now, in fact, actually, because I'm doing an aggregation rule, because I want 3 in 2 minutes, I'm doing a threshold rule here. So I need to use the threshold trigger. So the thing to do here is, actually, I want it to do every time. So I can just select that, right mouse click, activate trigger. And now I add conditions. Again, right mouse click, add. I'm just going to make this very simple. I'm going to do set event field. So I'm going to set some field information into this. So what I want to do is I want to change some of my category information. So I want to change my category behavior. So again, drop down. So it's given me a selection list of a whole bunch load of things here that I could change and adjust, and it's even given me the actual field names as well. But I can see there's a whole bunch there, and I'm actually going to set that to be authentication verify. I'm going to set the technique brute force login, and I'm going to set the significance to be hostile, and the rest I'm going to leave the same. I'm also going to change the priority of the event as well. So if I scroll all the way to the bottom, I can see there's the priority, and I'm going to select that to be 7. I could just enter 7 in there as well, but whatever, it's there. When I'm finished, press OK. It puts those into the set event field actions here. I could put multiple in there, and again, do read the manual. You can put derived information, you can do calculations in there, you can put additional field information in there as well. So I do strongly recommend reading the manuals for doing this too. So now I've created that, I can press apply. What it does do is it does a quick evaluation of the conditions that I've set for aggregation, just to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. And I'm going to come back to a couple of key points here, and I'm actually going to edit this just to make a point too. First off is it's looking at this saying, well, you probably want to do aggregation to limit exposure of the correlation on these events based on the zone that they're in. So at the moment, I'm making no differentiation of where these events have come from or what zone they might be defined in as part of the network and asset model. So you probably want to put that in there. Additionally, I probably want to put some additional aggregation based around the host name and address. I've used target and attacker addresses, so it's okay, and I could put that in, but for test purposes, I'm not going to bother. So I define it, it then gets added to my little rule group here. I could put the rule anywhere at this point, but I just want to explain the point. So I go back to my filter here. Remember, in this case, I'm just looking for failed logins. Now this is a problem that you could get into, and you need to be very careful of. Of course, I've done this deliberately, but this could match on another event as well. So if I look down here and see some of these probable successful attack brute force, let's just open that event, look at in event inspector. I see category behavior, authentication verify, outcome success. Well, it's nearly the same thing, but there is conditions where a correlated event could also trigger this particular demonstration rule that I have here as well. So I probably, realistically, I really want to set an additional test in here based on type, because I only want to use this on base events. I don't want to use this on correlated events. So I want to use base events. And notice when I do that, and the reason why I've done this is it's doing the filter, it automatically adds in the AND condition for me. So it says, and I go back to my summary now, matches filter, that filter, and the type is base. So it will no longer correlate against correlated events as well. So it's only going to be on base events. Because I've made a change to it, I can just press apply. Again, it pops up the little dialog box. Do I want them added? No, I don't really mind for the moment. And hey presto, I've done my little addition. Okay, now I've done that, what do I do next? Well, I actually have a few options here. I actually have the ability to test this rule. So what I will do is I just set some replay on my events again, just to make sure that they're going to come through. And what I can do is just hit test, and it allows me to test the rules. So I can actually do this on a channel I've created. Notice it actually gave me an option. Or I could do it on an existing channel, and I could do that on my demo live, which is what the channel I'm using at the moment, and just hit run. What that does is it runs what's in that channel through this rule as an evaluation, and then it gives me what correlated events are hitting this. So it takes a second for it to actually correlate it. It's not doing all correlated events, all correlation rules. It's just doing that one. And it's a really good way of testing. So now we can see we've had a number of triggers on this. If I look at my event, notice a couple of things here. First off, the name of the event that was created from the correlation, is the name of the rule that I've given it. Remember, I called it my failed login rule. And if I open that, I can then see that's the correlated event itself, my new event that I've created, and it automatically links the corresponding events underneath that have triggered it, which of course, me just clicking on them, it automatically updates it here. If I go to my actual correlated event here, notice how, of course, I set priority, and I set some of this categorization here as well. But notice how some of the data is incomplete. So if I look at the failed password, I actually had a whole bunch of other information in here. I had a whole bunch of information to do with devices and attackers and zones and so on. I can see a whole set of information around this, even down to SSH stuff. If I go to the correlated event, this is all blank, because I haven't used the aggregation capability to bring it in. What does that mean? So if I go back to my failed login rule, if I wanted to bring that field information in, I would actually put those additional fields into this particular aggregation section here. So what I could do is put some additional information in here with regards to additional fields that I want to put in here. So what I could do, for example, here's attacker zone. Notice how it actually italicizes the fields that it thinks are suggested ones to actually do. Target zone, if we remember on some of the other aspects, there was all sorts of information. So let's just do those two, put those in there, press apply. No, I don't want those added. Okay, it's just a warning message. And of course that data would get added. So it just gives you the ability to put those additional fields into the correlated event, so we can actually see that data in there. And of course then we could use that for other correlation rules. So that's the reasoning why we want to do that. Of course, that's very simple. It's very straightforward. I've just done the test there. If I go back to my particular event demo live up here, I can see there's a whole bunch of information, bunch of rules, and so on. And of course, if I just triggered some of those events to flow through again, I would actually see the actual triggers for that particular section there. But of course, in this example, I wouldn't actually see any of my rules triggered. So I need to explain that as well. I did the test and I could see that. But remember, I ran what was in my channel through the rule to give me a result. It just did it for that one off, one hit. It hasn't done it here. So now I've replayed the events. I haven't had any hits here. Why is that? Because when I've created my rule, I haven't put it in the real-time rules to run. So what I need to do next is I need to just click, drag and drop in the real-time rules. What I do now is have an option of what I want to do. Want to physically move this rule and put it into that group? Do I want to copy it so I have two copies of the same resource? Or do I want to link it? Link it means that it's the same reference effectively, and if I change one, it'll change the other one for me. So in fact, I'm just going to do link for the moment, and it puts it into real-time rules. You saw a little dialog box that flashed up that says I'm putting it into real-time rules. Now it's in real-time rules, it'll actually trigger. So again, I do the same. Replay those rules and give it a second. That will now trigger, and I will see the particular correlated events triggered from these base events. Very, very simple, very, very straightforward. So there we go, it's just updated and we can see the MyAffair login rule. Of course, I probably want to give it a more realistic rule name, and of course, as part of the rule, I can actually allocate information in there and I can use variables and so on. Again, I strongly recommend reading the console manual to see that and get a good guide to the options that we have available to that. So okay, quick recap on what we've done, just to make sure of the methodology, the way we think about how we create these rules. So if you just remember the process I used, number one, make sure that you've got an understanding of what the events are. There's no point writing a rule unless you know what those events are to create the rule that's going to match them. A good way of doing that is make sure you've got an active channel where you can see the events. If you can, even dig down and create an actual filter that's just looking for those events themselves. Nothing more, nothing less, just those events. And then actually have that active channel open. Because when you start to create the filter, so if I go to my filters, as I start to create my filter, as I'm populating and doing things, these drop-down boxes automatically populate from the events in the active channel. So I don't have to type anything. It becomes easy at that point. So have the events, number one, create filters and have a precise view of what we're doing around this so we can see what's going on, is number two. Number three, as we're creating the rule, actually just understand how we're doing it. Be careful and considerate. Use filters as part of the rules wherever we can. Make sure that we understand that we're matching only base events. If we are doing correlated events on correlated events, that's okay. But be very precise how we want to match this, because what we don't want to do is get a race condition and have the rule automatically disabled. Next, we need to consider the aggregation. How are we doing this? This is a very simple matching aggregation here. So make sure we understand the fields that we're matching. Make sure we understand how we want to do the time range across that. And then finally, the actions that we want to trigger. I've only done a very simple action trigger here. So it's just setting some field events, but I could trigger a notification, create a case, and do whatever I want. In fact, you saw a brief overview of some of the options there, of some of the things that I could do. So I could set events, I could trigger to a HP Open View, I could send a notification, run a command on a connector, even trigger to an external system, create a case, add to an active list, session list, and so on. So there's a huge amount of stuff that I could do here. I've only done a very simple one. But make sure we understand what we want to do as part of the triggers there. And then ultimately, when we do the test, because we've had everything set and ready, we've got active channels with the relevant field, with the relevant event information in it, we can just run the test on that active channel and it gives us the testing results. So we can see this as we're doing it. So we don't need to start waiting for the events to occur or anything. We can actually test this and run this and view things as they're occurring and make sure we get everything correct prior to putting it into production. Which gives us the final stage when we go to the rules, is taking that defined, precise, accurate and tested rule and then putting it in the real-time rules. Now, of course, it depends on how your policies are set up for putting the rules and where and how you want to manage this. I did a link because I like the link, because it means that I just need to work on that one and I can automatically update that one. But of course, you want to manage things accordingly. So once you've done that, you have a running rule, and now that's going to trigger every time I need to. As I saw earlier, I have my triggers that are happening in real time. It's as simple as that. It need not be complicated and it need not be difficult to do. And as I proved, it's only a limited number of clicks that we have to go through to create some of those rules. Use the tabs that you have. Use the tabs for the viewers, use the tabs for the inspect edit, and use the testing capability to see what the events are going through and how they're being correlated as well. So that's a very quick run through. I'm going to go through in a lot more detail with regards to some use cases and using active channels on a subsequent test and training session. So we'll leave it at that for the moment. I hope that was useful, and thank you very much.